Good evening, I'm Leslie Foster, and welcome to the WUSA9 Town Hall with Maryland Governor Wes Moore. Thank you for being here, Governor Moore.
Leslie, it's my joy.
And thank you to all of our Maryland residents who have joined us in studio. We know many of you have questions on topics that impact your loved ones and your livelihoods. So we're going to be covering several big issues tonight, including crime, education, the economy, and a few other topics. But first, Governor, I'd like to start by asking you a few things that are in the headlines. Perhaps you've heard of the Commanders. Yes.
The Prince George's County Commanders. Yes. Yes.
Well, let's get to the first question. Let's get to the first question because we know they have new ownership. The big question now is, where is this new stadium going to be? We know there's a stadium authority in Maryland, which is using public funds for the rehab of both the Ravens Stadium and the Orioles Stadium if they extend their lease. Prince George's County wants to know where their share of this pot might be. So I guess the question for you is, are you willing to leverage public funds to help fund a new stadium? And can Prince George's County get their share of that stadium authority pot?
Yeah, well, I can tell I am incredibly excited about this new ownership group. I think, people are seeing that a new life has almost been breathed into this franchise, which is a long and a storied franchise that we know that its future should be in Prince George's County, Maryland. And when we think about what that means, there's a few guiding principles that I have when it comes to how we're thinking about sports and supports. One is, I'm a believer in public-private partnerships, but they need to be ones that benefit the public. Right? We can't have public-private partnerships that do not benefit the people who are helping to support that. And so part of the reason that we've already made a significant investment and shown the new leadership team for the Commanders that we're serious about this, just in the last session, we allocated $400 million that's going to be going towards all the work that's happening around the stadium. Because for me, it's not just about, are we producing a winner on the field? It's about, are we producing a winner outside of the stadium too? Are we building economic growth that everyone is benefiting from? Are we building new businesses, new entrepreneurs, new pathways to work, wages, and wealth? The beautiful thing about this new leadership team and the conversations we've already had is they believe in that. There's the same type of philosophy. So I believe that this stadium should be in Prince George's County. I believe it will be in Prince George's County. I know that we are excited to support the endeavor to make that happen, but I also know it needs to be something that's going to create a measurement of generational activity and generational participation for the citizens of Prince George's County and the citizens of Maryland.
But are any of these stadium authority funds going to be allocated to Prince George's County for the purpose of building the stadium itself? You talked about the infrastructure around it, but can the county count on the money from the state to build what is going to be whatever the new stadium will be?
Well, I think that's part of the conversation, part of the negotiation that's coming up now, where we understand that there needs to be a measure of participation and growth that needs to be led by the ownership team, that's going to be led by the team owners. We believe in having our share of partnership. I believe in that deeply. But we also know that when it gets down to the details, it needs to benefit the people of the county and it needs to benefit the people of the state in order for the deal to make sense.
Speaking of something benefiting the state, Maryland is anticipating cannabis to be $1 billion industry by 2025. And I know that you've said that starting in January of next year, the state is going to issue licenses to people who have lived in an area that were impacted by the war on drugs or people who were personally impacted by the war on drugs. And so this social equity construct in Maryland really is one of the first of its kind in the nation.
That's right.
You talk about equity quite a bit in your leadership. Why was it so important to have this part of what happens with this cannabis industry?
Well, we've seen how the war on drugs has had a disproportionate impact on communities of color and low-income communities. And so we knew that as we're going to have this rollout of cannabis in the state of Maryland, it had to start with that. It had to start with the fact that you cannot have an industry that has already had a disproportionate impact on a community that now when you're legalizing it is not going to have ways of being able to benefit and support that same community that's been hurt so significantly by this larger war on drugs. That we cannot talk about the benefits of legalization if you're not also talking about the consequences of criminalization. And so as we have then rolled this out, and I'm very proud of the state of Maryland, because within less than 90 days from the passage to now having an equitable rollout that started on July 1, we've been able to really create the national gold standard as to how you can have this rollout happen that can be beneficial, profitable, but also equitable. That the state of Maryland is leading on this issue. And we knew when we came on board, in the last election, the state voted overwhelmingly that we were going to have recreational cannabis in the state of Maryland. I knew that as the next governor, that this was something that our administration was going to have to take a real sense of ownership and leadership of. And when I think about what's happened even over these past weeks now, that we've had a recreational market here in the state of Maryland, once again, Maryland is leading the way, and it's because we're being deliberate and it's because we're being intentional about it.
I hear you say the word equity. You used that word when you tried to make the case about why the FBI headquarters ought to be in Maryland as well. And so it appears, and WUSA9 has really been leading away in a lot of this reporting, that Maryland is closer in the lead to potentially getting this FBI headquarters. Can you quantify for people what that would mean for the state, what it would mean for Prince George's County specifically, where the advocacy to move this FBI headquarters would be?
Well, the FBI building, this is the largest project that GSA has ever done, this new FBI building. When you think about what's happened even over the past half century, the largest buildings that the federal government has pulled together were the Pentagon and the CIA building. This is the largest building since that. And by the way, the Pentagon and the CIA, they both went to Northern Virginia, right? And so the argument that we were making, and I'm grateful for the fact that last September, the GSA put together their guidelines that I just thought, and many of us, part of the Maryland delegation, just thought was categorically unfair. That you're putting proximity to Quantico worth 35 points, which makes absolutely no sense. And so now, just recently, they come back and have adjusted their guidelines, which is now putting things like cost, putting a heavy emphasis on cost, which should be a huge priority when you consider the fact that it's the taxpayer dollars that can be paying for this, so therefore the taxpayer should get the best deal out of it. That is putting a greater emphasis on things like transportation. If you look at the Prince George's County sites, we actually have transportation assets that are already in place to be able to support the building. That we're putting a greater emphasis on things like the mission, where you look at the future mission of the FBI. The future mission of the FBI, as the FBI director has laid out, is things like cyber. Well, Maryland is the home of U.S. Cyber Command. Maryland is the home of Fort Meade. Maryland is the home of NSA. Maryland is the home of University of Maryland College Park and Johns Hopkins University, two of the top institutions of the country focusing on cyber. And yes, on equity. And when we talk about equity, the multiple definitions of that word, considering the fact, if you look at economic competitiveness, of the top 150 jurisdictions in the country, Fairfax County, Virginia is number 2. Prince George's County, Maryland is 107. Prince George's County, Maryland is a majority African-American jurisdiction, which has done remarkably well considering the fact that oftentimes it has been completely neglected when it comes to federal assets. So if we're going to make a conversation and talk about where is you going to have a building that's going to have over $4 billion of economic activity, hire over 2,000 people, that if you want to make the best argument about where you're going to have the largest and the most impactful generational impact on a community, the answer is clear and the answer is simple. It is Prince George's County, Maryland, and we're thankful that the GSA has altered its criteria. We think the criteria now laid out is much more fair, and we are excited for, hopefully in short order, when the final decision is going to be made, that the FBI building will be coming to the state of Maryland.
Well, let's continue this conversation, and I want to get to some questions also from our audience. And I want to tell everybody that the audience provided the questions, most of them that you're going to hear today. They are Maryland residents. Some of them are stakeholders in the community who serve other residents, and that lens informed their questions. Each of them submitted their questions to us ahead of time. We did not edit them. We chose a selection that gives us a broad look at the big issues, and each question was chosen by a panel of journalists who did not know the name of the person who submitted it. So why don't we get started, Governor, and we're going to talk about crime, I should say, with Vernita Coy, who is from Temple Hills. Vernita, what's your question?
Good evening, Governor.
Good evening, Vernita.
We have experienced an uptick in crime in the Temple Hills area in Prince George's County since April. Most notably, there have been several gunpoint carjackings in small communities, 7 in mine alone. We should not be afraid to go home in the evening. Wanted to know if this has been brought to your attention, and have you offered any assistance to County Executive Angela Alsobrooks, because this will definitely affect her election to Senate.
Well, first, Vernita, bless you, and thank you for that question. And I tell you right now, this is one of the reasons that I decided to run for governor in the first place, because nobody should be fearful of the neighborhood they live in. Nobody should be fearful of the community that they call home. Everyone should feel safe in their own skin. And so when I think about the work that's being done right now, and you know, and I'm glad you really brought this up, Anita, because also this is not, unfortunately, it's not a new issue in our state. You know, over the past 8 years, we have seen how the homicide rate in the state of Maryland over the past 8 years has doubled. For the past 8 years, we've seen how in the state of Maryland, the rate of non-fatal shootings has doubled in the state of Maryland. So we knew that we were going to come in and take an entirely different approach, an all of the above approach, in the way that we're dealing with crime and the way we're dealing with public safety. And that includes things like making sure that we put over $11 million into the Maryland Coordination and Analysis Center, which in the state of Maryland is the governor's #1 tool for intelligence collecting and intelligence sharing with all the jurisdictions, making sure that we're doing things like keeping illegal guns out of our neighborhoods and out of our streets, because the majority of these illegal guns are not even coming from the state of Maryland. They're coming from other states. By putting over $122 million into local law enforcement, that making sure that local law enforcement have the tools and have the supports that they need dealing with the vacancies that we continue to see within local law enforcement, making sure that we are holding people accountable, and particularly repeat violent offenders accountable for their actions, and knowing that for these repeat violent offenders, we have no patience and tolerance and we are coming. But also letting people know this: we're not going to sentence our way out of something that's also a bigger challenge. And that we don't have to give in to the false choice that oftentimes we've been given, that's saying you can either deal with public safety or deal with the reality that right now in the state of Maryland, we incarcerate more African American boys between the ages of 18 and 25 than anywhere else in this country. That's not the answer, and the data continues to show that. And so we have to be able to take an all of the above approach that does both focus on putting together supports for law enforcement. It does make sure we're holding people accountable and holding violent offenders accountable, but it also means things like making record investments in our public education system. It means doing like what we did within our administration and actually having what we call the Safe Summer Initiative, where we've now put $5 million into ensuring that we can actually target the 25, and now that number's expanding now, we've actually expanded now to 50, of the youth that we know have the highest probability of either being a victim or a perpetrator of violence, and making sure that we are providing wraparound services for those individuals so they can actually make it through the summer and beyond safely, and make sure other people are making it through the summer and beyond safely. So this really means taking an approach where every single facet and asset that we have to be able to support our youth and support the communities are being put into place, and taking a completely new and a different type of approach to be able to deal with something that, frankly, in the state of Maryland, we've been wrestling with for the past 8 years, and simply scratching our heads and giving thoughts and prayers is not going to be enough, not in this time, and not while I'm governor.
Governor Moore, I'm going to move us through more of these questions so we can get to a lot more of the questions here. And I want to shift topics a little bit for this next set of questions, because we want to focus on the economy, transportation, and housing. And we're going to have a question from Amy Javed, who is the president and CEO of A Wider Circle from Kensington, Maryland. Amy?
Good evening. Across Maryland, residents are struggling with rising costs of housing, food, and other expenses. COVID-era social benefits for the most vulnerable have ended, leaving even more in need. How do you intend to address these rising needs, and how do you plan to specifically connect with public, private, nonprofit, and faith partners to allow greater access to needed services, along with programs and opportunities for more among us to thrive?
Yes. Thank you so much, Amy, and thank you for that question. And you're right. You know, when people say, "Well, it feels like things are becoming more expensive," the truth is, it's because they are. right? This is real. And people are feeling these impacts in so many different ways. It's housing, it's transportation, it's all these other facets that we know that we have a collective measure to address. One, and you're absolutely right, one, we have to recognize we cannot do this alone. You know, I was fortunate where, you know, I've never been an elected official before the people of this great state gave me the wonderful honor of being the governor. I ran one of the largest poverty fighting organizations in this country. And I know that when you think about the spine, the backbone of the social sector of our society, it's our nonprofits. It's the ones who are out there doing the work and fighting, ensuring and making sure that people are getting the supports that they need. Government is not going to do this alone. And we have to make sure we are working in partnership with our nonprofit organizations, working in partnership with the private sector, working in partnership with community organizations, because I believe deeply in the idea that the ones who are closest to the challenge are the ones who are closest to the solutions. They're just hardly ever at the table. And so by creating a new way and a mechanism for us to be able to do that became really important. And that also means how we thought about our budget. Because if you look at the budget that we laid out, we created historic supports and grant processes for nonprofit organizations who are working in partnership with our state government, by being able to make sure that we're leveraging federal assets and being able to put together incentives to bring the private sector off the sidelines and have them being part of that solution. So the collective platforms about the way we're dealing with everything from food insecurity, housing insecurity, environmental injustice, those are all things that we didn't just make a priority in terms of our platforms, but also making them a priority by making sure that we're getting other people involved in that work as well.
You mentioned, Governor, the cost of housing, and this next question is about the cost of housing from Sharice Elzie, who lives in Columbia, Maryland. Sharice?
Good evening, Mr. Governor.
Hi, Sharice.
Can you tell me why the housing prices have skyrocketed? It kind of makes it difficult for a single person to purchase a house in most Maryland counties.
Thank you so much, Sharice. And you know, I was talking with somebody just about a week back, and asking the question of, could you actually buy a home in the neighborhood that you grew up in? And for so many Marylanders, the answer is not no, it's absolutely not.
Right.
Right? We have watched how the price of housing and housing values have far outstripped any type of benefits and gains that we have seen in terms of salary and salary increases. And that has had a disproportionate impact on Marylanders, particularly working families. And so there's a few things that we really work to get done. The one is, first, we just need to make sure that people are receiving more capital and people are actually getting more jobs. We're proud of the fact that we're now going on 5 straight months in the state of Maryland where we've had historically low unemployment rates. 5 straight months. Also, if you look at our first legislative session, we passed legislation working in partnership with the legislature to ensure that we got to a $15 minimum wage, because gone should be the days when we have people who are working, and in some cases multiple jobs, and still living at or below a poverty line. So we had to be able to increase people's wages. And at the same time, though, when we're talking about housing, there's 3 core things that we've got to do and we are focusing on when it comes to being able to address housing. One is we need more inventory. We have to make sure that as we're building new units, that we're working with our development partners to ensure that these are affordable housing units that are being developed. The second thing, we have to make sure that the inventory that we have is actually habitable, because in so many of our jurisdictions, we have housing that's just completely inhabitable when you look at its conditions. And the third, we've got to do more to be able to make sure that people have supports who are inside their homes. You know, we are in the last BPW meeting, the Board of Public Works, we've now just allocated millions of dollars going towards rental housing works to have greater supports for people who are in housing. Also, if you look at the last budget that we've laid out, we put tens of millions of dollars going towards providing supports for first-time home buyers. Because also, if you want to address the wealth gap, you need to create more equity and have more homeowners. So increasing in inventory, making sure we're providing supports for people who are inside of their homes, and also doing more to make sure that those homes are habitable are all core priority areas that we have for our administration, because housing is the #1 driver of long-term wealth. It's also the #1 driver of poverty. And the state of Maryland has got to get this right.
Let's take a question about retirement income from Karen Ellis of Silver Spring, Maryland. And we had to put a graphic up here to follow this one, Karen. You made us work for this one. This is good, though. So go ahead and ask your question of the governor.
Good evening, Governor.
Hello, Ms. Karen.
The 15 states highlighted here do not tax retirement income, and Maryland is not one of them. In fact, if I withdraw from my 401k right now, the tax rate is 7.5%, 1.5% more than the state sales tax. My question is your administration considering joining the other 15 states that do not tax retirement funds? If yes, exactly where are you in the process of making this a reality? And if not, please explain why this isn't a consideration.
Thank you so much, Karen.
Lots of clapping for that question.
No, I'll clap for it too. So first, I'm going to tell you, when we talk about things like how do we make our state more competitive, how do we want to make we want to make sure that Maryland should be the best state not only to live in, but also to retire in. It includes making sure that people who are retiring in the state of Maryland are able to keep their money. Because if we can do that, the long-term benefits become significant, because it's not just about them, that's oftentimes where their family stays, where their families build businesses. And when you see people who retire, these are oftentimes people who also go on to do additional jobs, go on to start businesses. And we want to make sure that they're doing it here in the state of Maryland. And within our first 6 months of office, we've already shown, a level of commitment to doing that. And I can tell you that we're here and ready to do more. Where we started off looking at military veterans, where in our first legislative session we passed our Keep Our Heroes Home Act, which now gave the largest tax relief to veterans under 55 that Maryland has seen in a generation. That when you look at all the big initiatives that we were able to do here in the state of Maryland, we're proud of the fact that we've been able to be bold in our first 6 months and also not raise taxes on a single Marylander. In fact, give $200 million of tax relief to Marylanders. But we know we've got to do more. And specifically for our retirees, especially for people who have already devoted their lives to supporting the people of our state, our public servants who've devoted their lives to continue to support our state, and we want them to be able to stay here. So we're proud of the progress that we've made thus far. We know that we are not done. I'm very clear that we are not done, because we want to make Maryland the best state to not just stay and live and play, but the best state to retire. And being able to provide more supports for retirees in the state of Maryland is part of that equation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Karen.
Great job to all of our Maryland residents who've asked some terrific questions, and thank you to everybody. Coming up, we're going to get to some other topics like education. But first, our Larry Miller has a few questions for you, Governor, on that front. So Larry joins us from our second studio with a preview. Hi, Larry.
Hi, Leslie. Yeah, we're calling this Studio B with our studio audience in here. We're going to talk with the governor about artificial intelligence and Maryland's opt-out policy in Montgomery County. We're going to get his reaction to all of that coming up after the break. Welcome back to the WUSA9 Town Hall with Maryland Governor Wes Moore. I'm Larry Miller in our second studio here at WUSA9, joined by the rest of our studio audience. You see them there. Again, we are thankful to have them here with us this evening, and we appreciate you being here with us as well. And we appreciate the governor. And Governor Moore, we have a lot of questions that we want to tackle this evening, so let's get right to it. We want to talk about education and safety. There's a growing conversation happening nationwide about what is taught in school and the sorts of books that are accessible to children. This year alone, Montgomery County Public Schools decided to do away with its opt-out policy. That policy allowed families and students to opt out of family life and human sexuality instruction. The change, as you've probably heard, has resulted in considerable backlash. Even a lawsuit was filed against the school district. Governor, you are a father of two. Where do parental rights in schools stop and the rights of school districts begin?
Yeah. I understand and I respect the importance of the partnership and the relationship that parents have with school districts. Parents are and should be very involved in what happens in the work and the curriculum of their students. I know that I am very involved. My wife is very involved in our children's education. I also know that as these are local jurisdictional issues and the partnership that takes place between parents and local jurisdictions, while that's important because that is the foundation about how we think about everything from curriculum to scheduling, there are just two guiding principles that I hope that local jurisdictions and parents keep in mind, because I know that's what I keep in mind when it comes to my own children. One is that I want my children to receive an education that prepares them for the world that they are going to inherit. And it's beautiful diversity. The other is I want my children to have an education that sees them and lets them know that they are welcomed everywhere that they are. And so while these are local jurisdictional issues, and I respect that, and I know that local jurisdictions are working with PTAs and parents to come to the right solution for their jurisdictions, those are just the two guiding principles that I hope that local leaders and also parents will keep in mind. We have to have an education system that is preparing our children for the world. And we have to have an education system that lets all of our children know that they're loved and they're seen.
But Governor, I want to drill down at least on one issue raised by some parents, is that there still should be, at least according to them, an option where families that may have religious beliefs that are contradictory to what's being taught in class, an option for their kids to be removed from that class and from that instruction. Is that something you support?
Yeah, and it's still, all the local jurisdictions are the ones who have the final say on how that works. Governors in the state cannot mandate nor dictate that. And so I know all the local jurisdictions right now are going through their processes about what they deem to be appropriate and age-appropriate work and content. But I want them to know that as the governor, as a state, and frankly, as a father, that I understand and respect how important a parent's role is inside of this, and all parents know that in partnership, they have to work with local jurisdictions to be able to determine, and making sure that curriculum is something that's not just appropriate for their child, but appropriate for all children. And that is something that I will support.
Maryland has some of the best school districts in the country. College readiness, resources, and support really is different depending on where you live. It can be exceptional in some areas and poor in others. How do we get all of our students on the same playing field regardless of where they live in the state?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the great things that we see here in the state of Maryland is that we've actually passed, and the legislature passed legislation back in 2021, the blueprint, which really lays out what does a 21st century education system look like. And not a 21st century public school education system for some kids. It really is about how are we going to have a 21st century education system for all children that's going to make sure that they are prepared for the world and prepared for college and careers as they end up finishing high school. And so there's a few things that we are incorporating and that we have to incorporate when it comes to our public education system. One is we've got to be able to start earlier. That when you consider the fact that 80% of brain development happens in a child by the time that child is 5 years old, that should be no reason that children are starting school at the age of 5. We've got to be able to start earlier and put the supports in place to make that happen. We've got to be able to create pathways for our students at an earlier stage to understand the different options and opportunities that they have. While we have some of the best four-year institutions in America here in the state of Maryland, something that we are all very proud of, I also know that not all of our students need to attend one in order to be successful, in order to have a prosperous life, and be able to create the pathways earlier for students to be able to understand that. And also making this a place where we can recruit and retain top quality educators into our classroom. It's one of the reasons that we are so proud to pass the Teacher Shortage Act of 2023, one of the first bills that we introduced, one of the first bills that I signed, that's making sure that all of our students are getting access to a high quality and motivated educator inside of their classroom.
Speaking of the classroom, artificial intelligence is gaining ground. You know about that. Everyone's talking about it nationwide. And there is an expectation that many industries are going to be uprooted and upended as a result of job loss and this new technology that we're starting to see. How do we make sure that our schools are preparing our students for what this new technology will bring?
Well, I think we have to make sure that we are actually being engaged and involved in that process. I'm excited about what the promise of AI is, especially when you consider the fact that here in the state of Maryland, we have some of the leading institutions that are on the forefront of this type of technology. Some of our institutions of higher education are some of the largest investors in this type of technology. There's real promise that can come from it, but it needs to be understood and it needs to be guarded. Because we cannot have a technology that is moving so fast that we have a jurisdiction in a society that is not either prepared for it or doesn't understand its capacity and its capabilities. We're watching how the science and the understanding and the knowledge of AI is moving so fast. So we as a state, I want Maryland to be a leader, the leader in AI and understanding the impacts and the positive impacts it can have on society, but there still needs to be an understanding and its guardrails of how it's implemented, what it's doing, what its capacity is, and how it can turn around to the benefit of Maryland and not necessarily just watch it and be on our heels as we're continuing to watch that technology evolve.
Governor Moore, always good to talk with you. Thank you for your time. We appreciate it.
Great to see you, Larry.
Leslie, we'll send it back to you with even more questions.
All right, thanks, Lair. And as we get back to audience questions, just a reminder that we are joined by Maryland residents, some of them representatives of the community, who also have questions about the people they serve on a daily basis. And it's important to note that all of these questions were submitted to us. A panel of journalists ultimately chose them based on the question itself without knowing who asked it. So, Governor, let's get right to a question from Tanya Edison. She's from Upper Marlboro, Maryland. Tanya?
Hi, good evening, Governor. How are you doing?
How are you?
My question is, how are we going to address the violence that are currently current in our school system?
Thank you so much, Tanya. And when we're watching where, what we want for all of our kids is for them to be able to go to school and know that the number one thing on their mind should be the class they're taking or the test they have at the end of the week, not their safety. That should not be something that is at top of mind for our children. And so by being able to have and work with local jurisdictions to be able to make sure that we have safe communities and safe supports, by being able to know that there are local jurisdictions that are focusing on new IDs and new technologies to making sure that students are safe, by being able to make sure that we're thinking about safety inside of our schools and community school builds in a holistic way are all priorities in the way that we're thinking about our work. Part of the reason that we've been so aggressive when it comes to things like funding community schools and making sure that it's not just about curriculum adjustments, but it's also things like dental care, eye care, all the other things, and being able to challenge the problem of poverty is we know this. When you have communities that are living in chronic and generational poverty, you show me a community that does not have hope, you are also showing a community that is living in violence. And so our ability to be able to address this, not just at its tip point, but also all the root challenges that communities are facing is the reason we have taken a full all-of-the-above approach in making sure that our students are safe and those who are educating them are also safe as well.
Thank you for your question.
Thank you.
Next up, we're going to go to the mayor of Forest Heights, Maryland, Mayor Troy Barrington-Lilly. What's your question, Mayor?
Good evening, Governor Moore.
Good to see you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks for being here. Good to see you as well. So I'm mayor of Forest Heights, which is a town that serves as the gateway into our state from DC and Virginia. I'm wondering, Mr. Governor, how are you going to attract and retain more technology firms to our state so people that work here, who live here can work here? And then also, how are we going to train our youth for these emerging technology careers?
I love it, and thank you for your leadership, Mr. Mayor. And one of the things I love about our state, when you think about the assets that we have here, that we really are the technology hub of the East Coast, that we know this is the home of life sciences, that you're looking at Prince George's County, this is the capital of quantum, the national global capital of quantum. We have the various technology assets that we need. The challenge for the state of Maryland is we have been asset rich and strategy poor. And so our ability now to be able to take and harness those various technologies and both be able to celebrate them and show them and take the state on an 8-year roadshow to show these technology companies that this is the place that they have the best talent pipeline. But also it's about making sure that the technology companies are reaching down into our community college and our K-12 system to be able to create better pathways. It's the reason that we made record investments in things like P-Tech platforms, which is really combining the private sector with our community college and our K-12 system. So you have a student who will finish with a high school degree, an associate's degree, and a job offer because they've already been trained on the type of curriculum that's going to prepare them for those type of industries. So Maryland is uniquely placed and uniquely positioned to be able to take advantage of a technology revolution and to be able to beat all of our neighbors on this issue, but it means we have to be intentional and deliberate about it, which is exactly what we're being in this moment.
Mayor, thank you.
Thank you.
We've got a question next from Dana Marlowe. She is the founder and executive director of I Support the Girls from Silver Spring, Maryland. And Dana, what's your question?
Good evening, Governor.
Hi, Dana.
Maryland is already a leader in providing free menstrual products to schools and incarcerated women. Other states and DC have enacted legislation that requires all public buildings to have accessible free period products in women's and gender-neutral bathrooms. What would your next steps be towards increasing the scope of services to include state buildings? And how would you encourage Maryland cities and counties to do the same in libraries, recreational centers, and other public buildings?
Thank you so much. And also thank you for your work on this issue. You know, we're really proud in our first legislative session. We were actually able to move towards making this a more accessible and a more transparent society. If you look at some of the work that we were able to do on everything from reproductive rights and also female support products, that able to put them inside of state buildings and also in state universities. These are things that we're able to get done in our first legislative session, but we also know it's not going to be enough. You know, we were very clear when we came on board that leave no one behind meant everybody. And that part of the challenge we've had in terms of making progress is there's been a measure of politicization of this that's unnecessary. That part of what we've got to be able to do when it comes to being able to support issues like this is depoliticize this process, that this is not about a political party or an ideology, but this is truly about how we're making sure that all of our individuals and specifically our young girls are seen inside this moment and safe. And so while we made great progress on that, we know that there is more to do, more we will do, and we're going to make sure we're doing it in a way that's not politicizing this process.
Dana, thank you for your question. The next one comes from other topics we're going to talk about here, and we're joined next by Maryland Delegate Denny Tavares from Hyattsville, Maryland, and you've got a question.
Hey, Delegate.
Hi, Denny Tavares.
Thank you for the correction.
No problem. You gotta have the flair, you know.
Absolutely.
So thank you, Governor Westmore, for coming out here today. According to the World Economic Forum, 23% of jobs are set to be disrupted in the next 5 years. What are you doing to prepare those already in the workforce to transition them and minimize the job loss impact in the state of Maryland?
Yeah, thank you, Delegate. And one, you know, I'm proud to continue working with you on this issue because you're absolutely right. You know, when you think about the state of Maryland right now in our state, we're going on 5 straight months of historically low unemployment in the state of Maryland, which we're very proud of. And we think a lot of the initiatives and policies we put together has helped to make that happen. But I also know this, for every single person filing for unemployment right now in the state of Maryland, there's 2 jobs available. And so when people say, well, how does that make sense? It makes sense because we have a dynamic economy in the state of Maryland. We're just not preparing people to participate in that dynamic economy because you're watching how our economy continues to shift and move, but our educational processes are not keeping pace. And so there's a few things that we are doing is really helping to focus on that. One is the investments that we've been able to make in job retraining and job reskilling platforms. By being able to, so if a person's in an industry, that they have a chance to actually be trained up on an industry of the future, an industry that we know is going to be growing and help to sustain them and their family. The second thing is we've got to do a better job of supporting our entrepreneurs. And that means access to capital. It's the reason that we're very proud to have passed the Access to Banking Act to making sure that we're increasing liquidity, and particularly in our low-income communities and particularly in our communities of color, so we have a better chance of entrepreneurship for people who historically have not had the opportunity to get the basic access to capital that's going to be necessary for them to be able to grow. And the third piece is it means working with our education system and specifically our K-12 system. That we've got to have a K-12 system that's teaching our students how not just to be employees, but how to be employers. That's teaching them entrepreneurship skills. That's helping them to understand that all the things that they are a part of, that they can be part and leading in a growing economy. If we can do that, if we can do all 3 of those things, Maryland will consistently be on the forefront of economic growth and economic development, regardless of how our economic trends nationally and globally continue to evolve.
Let's dig in a little bit more on diversity and inclusion with a question from Mayor Selena Benitez, and she is the mayor of Mount Rainier, Maryland.
Hi, Mayor Benitez.
Hello, how are you? Great. And I just dropped my question. Thank God I know it by heart, right? So I would say, buenas tardes, so good evening for being here, Governor. My question to you is, what is your vision when it comes to implementing in your government inclusionary laws for Marylanders that are TPS, DACA, undocumented, and the underrepresented that are part of our community and often feel outsiders even within our own state?
Yes, Gracias por todos. Gracias por su pregunta. I tell you, the reason that I was very proud to be part of a large and a growing consortium for people who are calling for things like, TPS for people from Honduras and other countries. It's not just because it's the right thing to do. It's the right thing when we think about the growth of our state and the growth of our economy. I was just out in the Eastern Shore, for example, and we were out in the Eastern Shore and we were talking with the watermen out on the Eastern Shore, and we were talking about the visa issues that we continue to have here in the state of Maryland, and how it's one of the issues that universally, bipartisan, we're watching how Maryland needs to do a better job and needs to encourage the federal government to do a better job when it comes to visas and when it comes to allowing people to come to our state to become a part of our growing economy and our growing society. It makes us better and it makes us stronger. And you bring up a really important point, Mayor, because I'm proud of the fact that we have built the most diverse administration in the history of the state of Maryland. But one thing we've been able to show when you look at the people who are part of our administration, all our cabinet secretaries and agency heads, is when you focus on equity, that does not mean you compromise excellence, because this is also the most excellent administration that this state has ever seen. Our ability to be welcoming, our ability to be able to support, our ability to be able to welcome those who we know are just looking for and deserve a champion inside this work is not just to the larger benefit, a moral benefit of our state. It's going to be to the larger economic benefit of our state too, and that's the reason we continue to focus on these issues.
Gracias.
Gracias.
Let's talk a bit about the environment, if we could, Governor. Frederick Tutman, the Patuxent Riverkeeper, is here to ask his question.
Hello, Governor.
Hello, sir.
So there are lots of challenges facing Marylanders that threaten the natural environment: poor water quality, forever chemicals like PFAS and PFAS, climate change, diminished air quality. I mean, it goes on and on and on, just to name just a few. Can you name some benchmarks and goals for your administration that would tackle the problems of ethnic and class disparity as it relates to environmental justice?
Yes, thank you so much, and thank you for your work on this issue as well. We have chosen to be very aggressive on this issue within our administration, and both because we don't need any more reminders of the fact that climate change is real. We need no more reminders of the fact that we are watching this rollback happen, and it's happening at a pace and in a way that even those who came up with the most dire predictions are watching their predictions being outstretched. But also because there are real economic benefits to us for being able to do this right. The reason that we've said that I want Maryland to be the offshore wind capital of the planet, and why we quadrupled what we have as our target for offshore wind, knowing that the offshore wind that we're pulling together, it's not just going to be able to power over 3 million homes here in the state of Maryland and make us a net exporter of clean energy technology, but it's also because it's going to employ Marylanders in such a powerful way and create a new industry that's going to help us economically for generations to come. The reason that we talk about things like making sure that we are going to get to 100% clean energy by 2035 is not just because it's the smart thing to do and Maryland is going to lead when it comes to the environment. It's also because the clean energy and the green energy revolution is going to be financially beneficial to our state for us to be able to move and also be able to help address the wealth gaps that continue to exist within our society. And so, just last week, I was over in the Eastern Shore signing a few executive orders talking about how Maryland is going to reshift and double down on the way we're talking about things like protection of the Bay, the way we're talking about things like supporting of our environmental challenges and being able to address things like extreme heat, by being able to address the oyster population, because that's not just going to be important for the environment. It also means jobs and economic growth that our state can benefit from, and that we can do it in an equitable way that's going to be fair and beneficial to everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Let's get to Deanna Strong from Suitland, Maryland.
Hi, Deanna.
Hi, good evening, Governor Moore. It's a
Great
pleasure
to
to be with you here tonight.
Great to be with you.
As you reflect on the last couple of months as the Governor of Maryland, what is something that you thought you will be able to accomplish rather quickly, but are finding it difficult to achieve for Maryland citizens as a whole as you continue to make things more equitable?
Good question. I've been pretty happy with what we've gotten done so far. And I tell you because It's not just what we've been able to get done, it's that we've gotten it done together. You know, I think about this work that we've been able to accomplish. It's also because we've been able to accomplish it in a bipartisan way. You know, where I think I was told, and people said, listen, you know, getting people to work across the aisle, getting people to work across the state, it's going to be challenging, it's going to be difficult. But I look at the fact that we introduced 10 bills in our first legislative session. We went 10 for 10, and all passed bipartisan, with Democrat and Republican support. I think that the thing that, that I want people to understand, though, is that while this is the speed that we've moved at in the first 6 months, this is our pace. This is how we move. Because the future requires urgency, and the future requires Maryland to lead. And I'm not going to be focused on who came up with the idea. I just want the best ideas. And I think people are realizing that leave no one behind was not just a campaign slogan. It's a governing philosophy. And that's exactly what we hope and expect from the state over this next decade.
Governor, before we wrap up, I have to ask you about something that really has been the centerpiece of what you've been doing and gets to the heart of you. You said most recently in an interview with Vogue magazine that service will save us. Yeah. You are advocating and obviously have passed this law, thanks to legislators, that funds this year-long service for Marylanders who graduate to go into public service. And you said service will save us. And so I wonder, what does that mean to you? How will service save us?
I think about when I ran for governor. I had people who I served with in Afghanistan. I was a paratrooper. I led soldiers in combat. And there are people who I served with in Afghanistan who came and campaigned for me. And many of them were not Marylanders. Many of them were not Democrats. But they came and they knocked on doors on my behalf, and they just simply said, let me tell you about the guy that I served with. You know, in this time of political divisiveness and vitriol, in this time where there are people who have business models that are intended to separate us because they benefit from it, I believe deeply that we have to be a state that gets to know each other again. We've got to be a state that serves together. We've got to be a state that works together. That's why the SERVE Act was so important. Maryland is now the first state in this country that has a service year option for our high school graduates. First state in the country. In this time of political dismissiveness and divisiveness, if we serve together, we'll stay together. And if we save together, it is service that will save us in this moment.
We are all trying to emerge from this pandemic in an equitable way. You've touched quite a bit tonight on how equity has been part of your leadership. What does the future look like for us as we're emerging from this pandemic into a new normal, where we've seen the things that divided us before continue to divide us? I know you talk about service, but I like to ask this of leaders now, because this is a really important time in our existence. We've all come through something really traumatic, and now we're looking to what's next and what that new normal will be. Mm-hmm. And so I wonder, from all your vast experiences, both life and professional, what you think the next future looks like for all of us as we're emerging from this pandemic.
I think the future of our state is so bright. You know, when I say that this is going to be Maryland's decade, I mean that. And I mean that because I'm seeing it every single day. I'm seeing it whether we're talking about from Oakland to Ocean City, right? And everywhere in between in our state, because we're watching people actually working together and building together. And so when I think about what is the next state and what is the next process for us, it means that we as a state, that we're going to have to be bold. We're going to have to be thoughtful. And being bold and being fiscally responsible is not a choice. That oftentimes in our society, we've been given these false choices, these political false choices, that frankly, the only people who believe those false choices are real are lawmakers, because you know who doesn't? The people who live in communities where people say, do you want mental health or do you want, you know, policing and public safety? People in communities say, I kind of want both. I don't want to choose. Well, it's time as lawmakers that we say, and we're not going to ask you to, because we can and we should have both. And so I think that this is going to be the moment when Maryland rids ourselves of these false choices, where Maryland rids ourselves of looking at policy as some form of a game, because it has very real human implications. And that if we can decide and say as a state we can be more human, and we can be bold, and we can be supportive, and be responsible, and not choose, that I think that people are going to see that Maryland's just going to move faster than everyone else in the country.
Can you get lawmakers to come along, though?
100%, because I think lawmakers are going to be there too. And if you look at our first legislative session that we got done together, I was thankful to work in partnership with this legislature. We signed over 900 bills in this legislature addressing everything from economic security to public safety to the environment and everything in between. That we were able to, in just the bills that we introduced, go 10 for 10 with lawmakers with bipartisan support on every single one of those bills. And so people are seeing that when we say we can actually get this done together, I mean just that. And so yes, I think it's not just that we're going to be able to get lawmakers on board. And you know why we're going to get lawmakers on board? Because we're going to have the people. That's where my power comes from, the people. And that's why I know we'll be able to make the advancements we need to make.
Governor Moore, we want to thank you for your time this evening.
you.
We want to thank all of you for your thoughtful questions this evening. We truly appreciate it. And before we let you go, Governor, I know you'd like to make some closing remarks.
Yes, thank you so much. And first, as busy as everybody is, I just want to say thank you for making this time, and I want to say thank you for the opportunity and for your leadership.
Thank you.
Sincerely. You know, I think about this, this moment where 5 days before Election Day, I'm a grandmama's boy. And my grandmother, who was born in Cuba, raised in Jamaica, and then immigrated to the United States, she passed away 5 days before Election Day. And the last picture I have of her actually sits in my office right now, and that was her filling out her mail-in ballot for her grandson. And that picture sits right over my desk. And I know that I look at that picture consistently, and I ask if I'm doing right. And are we leading with compassion? Are we leading with heart and love? Are we leading in a way that she'd be proud of? And I'm so thankful that this state, that together we've been able to get big things done. And that we're not done. That we've got headwinds ahead of us. And we're going to push through them. Because we're going to push through them together. And we're going to make a state that those who came before us, that they hope for. And those who will come after us, that they deserve. And I thank you for this opportunity and for the joy and the honor of being your governor. So thank you.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And thank you to this amazing audience, to all of you who chose to be in community with all of us tonight. That's what this really is all about. Again, the questions that we shared today were chosen by a panel of journalists who did not know who asked which question, with the goal of creating a broad discussion, and I think we did, about the big issues facing Maryland. So thank you for your time. Thank you for watching this WUSA9 Town Hall. I'm Leslie Foster. From all of us here at WUSA9, have a good evening.